Welcome to Your Texas Land, a place where we take a deep dive into all things related to land in Texas. I'm your host, Brad Glover, and I'm happy to have you join us today. Each episode, we're going to explore topics that might affect you as a landowner. Today, I'm joined by Stephen Ringquist, an attorney here at Braun Gresham, and we're going to be talking about real estate, small businesses, and family businesses, and lots of things related to those three topics. So thank you for joining us today. Stephen, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Why don't, to get us started, Stephen, why don't you give us a little bit of your background?
So I've been practicing since 2006, representing family-owned businesses, people who own land, landowners, in a wide range of issues, and in particular representing them with regard to banks, with regard to land issues, land litigation, business litigation, buying and selling of property and businesses. And I've been doing that my whole career. So
great. Well, that's going to cover a lot of ground for a lot of our listeners. So very excited to have you. So let's get started. Let's kick it off with, let's talk about family-owned businesses. What are some of the different types of family-owned businesses that you see? And maybe even dive into some of the assets and kind of some of the way that families look at their businesses.
Yeah, so I've represented a wide variety of family-owned businesses. A big chunk of it has been agribusiness, so bioseed, crop dusting type operations. We did a biodiesel plant in one property, a lot of solar, wind leases on properties. And then there's the, run-of-the-mill types of businesses where they own gas stations or concrete companies that have land everywhere. And so there's lots of different types of businesses, usually kind of blue-collar type businesses, that you'll find on land, ranches. I represent a cattle company. Lots of different issues.
So when we think about family businesses, how many of them are actually on their family land?
Well, like I said, it depends on the type of business, what you're dealing with, but a majority of the agribusinesses are on the land. So the bioseed, the crop duster type, the concrete even, that was family-owned land, and now they're mining rocks and things in that property.
Off their land?
Yeah, so there's lots of different types of businesses. The cattle company, obviously.
So one of the things that we talked about earlier was there's a lot of experts that family businesses need to consult. When you think about that, obviously an attorney is probably one of them, but what are some of the other experts and applications why family businesses might need to call in some additional resources?
Well, I think when you're operating a business, you always have to have an accountant. But when you're selling or buying more businesses, you're going to deal with a wide variety of consultants. You'll have a business broker who will be brokering your business. You'll have your accountant kind of valuing your business for you. You'll deal with maybe a realtor on top of the business broker, or a real estate attorney, and maybe some HR type of advisors, depending on the size of your business, whether you're going to be taking on new employees if you're buying a business. And then if you are a larger family-owned business, because I represented a $1 billion family business in the past, and then also smaller type businesses where it's just mom and pop. If you're the larger size, you're going to have land strategy directors, people who are in charge of all your land and have portfolio type strategies for it. And so there's different types for different sizes of companies and how complex your family-owned company is.
And are most of those companies privately held?
They're all privately.
All privately held. Is that our definition of family business? It means they're privately held?
Generally, yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for that. I think as we think about a family business that's privately held, money, finance comes into play, obviously. Talk to us a little bit about some of your experience with helping family businesses and small businesses in terms of finance.
Yeah, so I guess with the larger one, the $1 billion one, they had 10 different entities that they had, all different types of businesses. And so when they're doing a refinance, they're going to have a lot more leverage in the negotiation depending on how the size of your loan. So if you have a lot of land, you're probably going to have more leverage in getting a loan or a refinance with a bank, because the bigger the loan, the more the bank is going to want it, and the more you can shop it around. So when you have leverage in a loan negotiation, you can call on an attorney to review your loan documents with you. Maybe get your guarantees to be only entity guarantees instead of personal guarantees. So they can't go after your personal assets. They can only go after the business assets, because a lot of banks will want personal guarantees. But if you're big enough, you can just do an entity guarantee. Or you can even limit it to just bad boy guarantees, which means only in the existence of fraud can they go after you personally. And so there's a lot of, and then same with covenants, with tripping covenants on loan docs. You can have less covenants when you have an attorney to be more creative on what kind of covenants are going to be in the loan documents.
Okay, so for someone like me, non-finance major, like give me a simple breakdown on when you're talking about covenants.
So how often the bank is going to check your financials? You're going to be coveting like ratios of debt service. So if you have a lot of entities, your debt ratio is going to be different, and so they're going to be wanting to have a smaller ratio, less debt in comparison to the loan that they have. So that's basically what they're going to be looking for on the covenant side is, are you hitting certain requirements that they have for the loan?
And so are those negotiable?
They can be, yeah. Depending how they're negotiable is basically reducing the amount of restriction that they're putting on you financially. So same with collateral. You can reduce your collateral if you have someone who knows how to deal with the bank on that. And so collateral is equipment, land, fixtures in land. So when you do a collateral, you'll have a deed of trust or a mortgage with regard to land, or you'll have a UCC financing statement that'll list all of your property, so personal property that goes along with the loan. And so banks are going to want everything that you own, basically, as collateral. And they take way more collateral generally than what they need. And so you want to try to reduce that. So maybe they just need the land and they don't need all your personal property, or just the personal property and not the land. And so you try to reduce that, so then you have more pieces or more equipment or collateral to finance in the future. So you can have more liquidity going in the future, and you're not dealing with just one bank or one loan.
Gotcha. That brings me to a question. I know a lot of small businesses reach a point where cash flow becomes really important and they need to start looking at financing. And you just kind of talked a little bit about that, but maybe you could touch on that a little bit more. What are some ways that some small businesses can navigate through a growth period when their cash flow may be tight?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to interest rates and how much you can get in comparison to how much you have to give as far as collateral goes. And there are resources for small businesses. There's the SBA, so SBA financing,
which is
Small Business Administration. And they have a lot of local resources locally, like county, that you can go to and get resources for your business, meaning maybe free legal work or free accounting or free, it'll be minimum but it'll be, if you're just starting out, or if you're squeezed financially and there's nowhere else to go, those are the types of resources that they can provide.
So is that a federal program?
Some of them are federal programs, some of them are local, state and county.
So there are resources out there for small businesses.
Oh, there's a ton of resources, yeah.
Okay. So maybe talk just for a minute, like how does a small business go about looking at some of those resources? They've started a business, it's been successful, they have a growth opportunity. How do they find help?
Yeah, I mean, there's the local, state, and federal resources. Then there's also private options. So there's private lenders. So if a bank won't give you a loan, then you can go to a private lender, which is like private equity, which will want a stake in your business if you're really needing cash bad. So you'll want to negotiate the percentage as low as possible. And then there's basically companies that you go to in the very dire straits for cash flow. And those are accounts receivable type lenders. And those just go based on how much receivables you come in. And their rates are really high. So
that's the lender of last resort?
That's the lender of last resort besides the credit card. Yeah. So.
Okay, credit card would be the last resort.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I mean, using the credit card isn't bad. It's just, it's not, as long as you know how to use debt to your advantage, it can be okay. It's just, the accounts receivables, they just take a ton of what you're planning on for your cash flow. So it's a temporary fix, but long term, it's not the best thing.
Gotcha. So it feels like in your role, you have played a little bit of an advisor role to some of these small businesses. So maybe talk about that, because we've kind of gone through, there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of ways to do things, a lot of ways to raise money, a lot of things that small businesses need to be aware of. What role do you play as an advisor to a small business?
Yeah, so I'm what is referred to as outside general counsel. Inside general counsel is your attorney that you've actually employed and answer questions on a daily basis internally. But for a lot of businesses, they can't afford a general counsel, so I'm like a fractional outside general counsel. Someone that they can go to that they don't have to pay full time, but can answer simple questions pretty quickly. And so I've gotten pretty good at that over a long period of time, dealing with a lot of different issues. So it can range from buying and selling property, buying and selling businesses, hiring new employees, doing employee handbooks, or advising on termination issues from an HR standpoint, and then just landlord-tenant issues that pop up. With landowners, you're renting out your land, and then also with business, you might own your own building and be renting to other commercial tenants or business tenants. So there's a lot of different types of issues that pop up with tenant type issues. And then if you're going to have a tenant and you're refinancing, you'll need to make sure that you're checking with your lender and things like that. So there's a lot of advising on the financing side, dealing with tenants as well.
I think, yeah, let's take a deep dive into the tenants and the leases. But before we do that, I like that idea of a fractional general counsel. So just means in simple terms that for a fraction of what it would cost you to hire an attorney full time, they can come to you with almost any variety of legal questions, and you're a resource for businesses, ability to provide them direction as well as forms and contracts and leases and anything like that. Am I summing that up well?
Yeah, and as far as contracts go, that's kind of what I am. I'm a contracts attorney, so transactional attorney. I've done a lot of litigation in my past, suing people, dealing with business disputes, dealing with land disputes, and I can handle those, or someone in the firm can handle those. So I am a resource for referrals too. So if I can't handle it, someone in the firm can probably handle it, or there might be an outside attorney I can refer them to. But I'm kind of the point of contact, or the resource that my clients go to as the first person to talk to.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. All right, shifting gears. Let's go to leases. I'm a landowner, and I have a lease. Someone's leasing and running some cattle on my property, or they're leasing my land to have a crop. What are some of the issues that can come up with that, and how do I need to view that as a landowner?
Well, you want to designate the location that they're going to be in, so there's no property line dispute as far as what's leased and what's not. So location is a big issue. Making sure that that has been either surveyed out, or if they're going to do the full property, that's fine. But most of the time, landowners have a lot of land and they only want to do a segment for the tenant or a segment for the solar lease. So there's a segment for the wind lease, and you don't want them overlapping. So those are the types of issues that could potentially come up. Same with any kind of mineral or oil issues that might tap into that location issue.
So clear delineation on the area that's going to be leased.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest issues with, same with not overlapping into your neighbor's property or something like that. And then what are they using the land for? Is it going to be a nuisance to your neighbor? And so if you're dealing with someone who's just doing crop, that's fine, but are they doing a pig farm? Because that can be pretty smelly and that can be a nuisance to your neighbor. So
what obligation does a landowner have if their tenant is a nuisance with a pig farm?
Well, they own the land, so they're responsible. It doesn't really matter with regard to the tenant. If you're the landowner, you're responsible for your tenant. So you're going to want to write in that, maybe their hours of operation is only from a certain time because, people are sleeping. And so, if you have a mining operation, for example, renting your land, they're going to be loud and noisy, and they're going to be running trucks all day long, and the same with road issues, that big trucks can damage roads, your neighbor's roads, and things like that. So you're going to want to write all those types of things into the lease, or deal with the lease in that manner. So if a concrete company comes to you and wants to rent your land out for a mine, you're going to want to make sure that you have an attorney to review all those types of issues, because you may not think of those. Most landowners are just thinking, how much money can I get for how long of a period, and then are you going to fix it when you get done? And that's all they're really looking for in the lease. They're not looking for all the legal issues that are coming with it. So
let's talk about leases. I feel like a lot of the leases that you see may be substandard to what you'd like. How important is the lease, and what are some of the key things, like you just mentioned a couple of them, but what are some of the key things that a landowner needs to really keep in mind as they look at a lease?
Well, you want to know first, what's the use? Is it a solar lease? Is it a wind lease? Is it a mining lease? Is it just a agricultural lease? And so the first is the type, and once you know the type, then you know the issues that are going to be involved with it. And so with wind, you've got, are they tapping into the grid? Are there the turbines going to be overlapping into your neighbor's yard? Are they going to be noisy, or all those types of issues that come with a wind lease? With an agricultural lease, we touched on a couple of those things, a nuisance and property tax issues that might pop up. Are they claiming any kind of property tax credit for that, and are you sharing in that? So those are the types of things you want to be looking for on the lease. And most of the time, a landlord will want to have their own form lease, but with mining leases, wind leases, and solar leases, those companies will come in with their own lease and say, this is the lease that you, the landlord, are supposed to use. And so
that doesn't actually mean you have to use that lease,
that's correct? Right. So we have our own forms for those types of leases that we've used in the past with wind and solar and mining companies. So we have forms that will be acceptable to those types of companies. And we've worked with those types of companies in the past. So.
And it's definitely a growing trend here in Texas. The wind and solar leases seem to be, wind and solar farms seem to be coming up more and more as I drive across Central Texas out into West Texas. So definitely an issue that deserves its own podcast. So we'll definitely make sure we cover that in the future. Let's go back to, let me finish up on leases, a more of the simple lease, a grazing lease or a crop lease. Is that okay just to pull a form off the internet and sign it? Is it, a handshake agreement? Is it like, give us some practical advice for some of the, maybe most common, what I would consider a simple lease and some of the things that can be issues there.
Yeah, I think with crop, just who gets the proceeds if the tenant leaves, if the property's abandoned, what are your landlord's rights in those situations? Making sure that you've talked to the lender with requirements for the tenant in lending or the loan on the property. If you have the property as collateral, they'll want an estoppel certificate or an SNDA. And an estoppel certificate basically states from the tenant that this is the lease and I'm not going to sue you saying that it's some other kind of lease. So the terms of the lease are in the estoppel certificate, and it stops them from going after the lender for any reason. The SNDA is subordinating the lease, meaning the primary contract on the property is going to be the deed of trust or the mortgage, and it's subordinated, the lease is subordinated, so that the lender doesn't have any issues if they foreclose on the property, that they'll take over the lease and be the landlord, basically. So that's the attornment part. So SNDA is subordination, attornment agreement, basically, and non-disturbance. So non-disturbance means the lender will not disturb the tenant as long as they provide the SNDA.
So that's necessary if there's a lien on the land.
That's correct.
So even on a simple lease, a landowner should have an SNDA.
Any kind of lease, if you have a loan on the property, should be cleared with the lender. If you're refinancing, if it's already existing, it should be fine. So
Okay, so I own the land, but I have a lien on it, and I've had it for a couple of years. I decide I want to lease some land out for someone to run cattle on. I'm clear. I can just
you'll
have a
want to check
simple lease agreement.
your loan docs to make sure there's no restrictions on leasing the property.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And if I own the land free and clear, what lease implications are there?
So there's the location, there's the nuisance issue, there's the term. How long is the term of the lease? Are there any special provisions that you want to put in the lease? Operational. When can you do it? When can they access the property? Is it only seasonal? Is it all year long? With crops, can they come in and do it on all season long, or is it just a certain time frame within that seasonal area? So there's quite a few issues, but you always want to make sure that they're indemnifying you, that you have termination rights, that if there's default, that there's some kind of escalation as far as the rent is concerned, that you have all the statutory requirements in there.
So let's go back to that first one, indemnification. Would you explain that? Start to me,
Sure.
and some of our listeners as well.
So indemnification clause is basically the tenant will, if there's a liability issue on the property, so if the tenant or a third party affect the land or any, the premises or the building, that the tenant will cover any costs associated. So they'll step in the shoes of the landlord to pay any issues or pay for any issues that happen on the property.
Okay, so I own the land. I'm leasing it out to a guy who's running cattle. One of his cows gets loose, gets on the road. A car hits it. The person gets hurt. They sue. Who are they suing? They're suing me, the landowner?
Yeah, they're going to sue you most likely, because they don't know who the tenant is, because the tenant is not going to have a land record, most
Right.
likely.
So
unless
how's my
they're on the
lease going to
taxes.
protect me?
So your lease with that tenant, as long as the tenant has insurance, which is another piece of the indemnification, is having insurance on the property in addition to your own general liability insurance or insurance for the property. So they'll have the insurance and the indemnification clause, and you'll look to that for them to step in and pay for everything as far as litigation costs, attorneys' costs, those types of things.
So the lease is really important to make sure you have that in there.
Right.
To protect you from any.
It allows you to point to somebody else rather than just yourself.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. So I interrupted you a little bit. That was the first thing you said. It was really important on the lease. Let's go through that list again after the indemnification.
Well, you want to, the names of the parties, so you want to make sure that you get the legal names. So that is a huge issue. You could have someone just put some random name on there, and then you try to sue them, and so verify and do your due diligence as to who you're actually dealing with.
Okay. Good to know.
Which is not something that a lot of people think of because
Yeah,
they just kind of trust.
I'm not sure I would have thought of that. They
Yeah.
say my name's John Brown, and you go, okay, here you go, John, sign here.
Yeah, and if you're a bigger option, bigger premises, you want to make sure that you're dealing with, like if it's a wind lease or a mining lease or one of those, you want to check out the companies, make sure that they're telling you the correct name, and actually looking up at the Secretary of State's office and making sure they're still valid, that they haven't had any lawsuits against them, any kind of litigation in dealing with landowners. So knowing who you're dealing with, even if they give you a big lump of cash, it might not mean anything because their operation's going to fold in 2 seconds, and then you've got all this equipment sitting on your property you can't get rid of. So,
All right. Indemnification, validating the identity of who you're actually signing with.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
yeah, terms and conditions. What are your requirements for the lease? Specifically, what do you want as a landowner? Obviously, that means money. What are your terms for payment? How are you going to get paid? What issues pop up, for payment, default clauses. So if the tenant doesn't pay, what are the scenarios for that? Insurance, indemnification, kind of the main ones that you're going to want in there.
So T's and C's, that's the section of small print that most people don't read.
Yeah, that's in a lot of sales literature, but yeah, terms and conditions apply to every contract. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you, as an attorney, how can you help someone with a lease like that? I'm assuming you could draft it, or you could review it, or you could do both.
Yep, that's kind of what people come to me for, is drafting contracts of all sorts. So if there's leases involved in the buying or selling property, we'll review those leases when you're buying or selling the property. If you're wanting to just draft a lease, we can look at that. If you're getting leases that are sent to you from a mining company or a wind company or a solar company, we're definitely going to want to review those, because they're going to give you the worst contract they can give to you, knowing that most landowners will just look at the price and not anything else. So what we do is make it a lot better from that standpoint, as much as we can.
Sounds like a small investment to make sure that you've got all the protection that you need on any kind of a lease agreement.
Well, especially if you're doing solar wind, because those last 40, 50 years on the property. So
Yeah, that's a long lease.
yeah, and a lot of landowners, they're getting on in life and they're getting older, and some of them don't care, but a lot of them do care about what the next generation is going to have to deal with. And so, do you really want to give your family something that they're not going to really want and have to deal with? And so having an attorney kind of advise you on that is
And help you walk
beneficial.
through that and
Yeah.
navigate that. Yeah, good. All right, one more shift of gears here. Just real estate. Buying and selling real estate, I know you've done a lot of that. What are some key things for people to keep in mind that an attorney can do in terms of buying and selling real estate, land, ranches, farms?
Yeah, I mean, if you're just buying and selling for ranches or farms, there's one thing, and then if you're a real estate developer, you're wanting to develop land, there's a whole another set. But for this conversation, we'll just talk about for landowners. So for landowners, you're definitely going to want to do potentially a survey. Make sure what you're getting is what they're saying you're getting. You can't go by the county records as to what the land description is or the legal description is. So you'll want to get a title commitment from a title company who's actually reviewed the abstract. And so with the abstract is basically the history of what's been on title. And is there easements that you're going to want to get rid of or don't like? Those types of easements are like blanket easements where someone just threw on an easement on all the entire property. Are there like severance agreements where they've severed the building and someone else owns the building on the property and no one ever knew that just popped up on a deal I'm working on right now. And so there are there's even like restrictions on what you can do from an agricultural standpoint. So some of the abstracts that I've reviewed have been very interesting in that, standpoint. You can't have chickens on the property or, types of restrictions that.
Things that you wouldn't expect.
Right. And so, it's just kind of the history of the property is what an abstract is. And so that's what a title company will do. And then they'll insure everything that is previous to that date. So you'll want to get a survey because then you won't have any boundary disputes. And if you do, then the title company will insure over that. And so that's what you're paying for the title insurance is everything previous, not going forward, previous to you buying it. And so that is the benefit of having title insurance. And so if there is a issue that pops up, you'll want to get money escrowed by the seller. So if you're buying, you want the seller to escrow it at closing until they fix that issue on title. So it's called a letter of undertaking. So they'll take on that issue of removing the encumbrance off the property within a certain time frame. And if they don't, then you get to keep that money that they put at closing. So that's one way to get around that. And then there's also phase one, which is testing the environmental issues on the property. So they'll test that. Phase one is a non-intrusive test. So they're just taking a soil sample and testing whether there's toxic chemicals or anything like that. So if it was a gas station or oil, whatever, refinery or something like that on that property previously, and no one knew that, or it was a long time ago, but something's kind of creeping up, phase one will tell you based on a soil sample whether that's going to be an issue. And then you go to phase two, which is an intrusive test where they actually dig up and find out whether that needs to be remediated from a state requirement.
So they'll do that if I wanted to go buy a ranch? That's a normal procedure to do a phase one, a soil sample? Is that a normal occurrence?
That's normal occurrence, especially if you're getting financing for the property.
Huh, okay. Good to know.
And a lot of landowners do get financing, but a lot don't, and so they don't know to do that. But you'll want to do that so you don't buy something that you don't regret later on, because remediation can be very expensive, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow. Now, would that be something that should fall under disclosure, or under the seller disclosure?
As long as the seller knows, but a lot of the time, seller won't know. They'll only know the time period that
they had it.
So, and they may never have tested it themselves. So that's something that you'll want to make sure. Another thing is sellers might not know that it is illegal, or, so there was a case that I did from a litigation standpoint where a seller sold property with DDT on it. And DDT is a banned substance since the 1970s. And so I had to represent the seller in that standpoint. And what I argued was the DDT was localized in a shed. And so it had no damage to the property. And so there's no damage to the buyer. And the remediation was not expensive with that standpoint. And so we had to get experts and engineers and people who knew about land, soil issues. And so they tested it and they agreed. And so I won that case. But anytime you see like DDT, you get scared. But the seller didn't know. He didn't even realize that was still in the shed and that was actually DDT, a banned chemical. So,
wow. It's always interesting to me to hear all the one-off stories that there are. So lots of that. Well, sticking with real estate, but shifting gears a little bit, one of the trends that we're seeing in Texas right now is fragmentation, where the 1,000 and 2,000 acre ranches are being split up into 50 to 100 acre sections to be sold. And let me rephrase that. So is that something you could help a landowner with if they wanted to do that? If they, instead of wanting to sell their entire property, they wanted to subdivide it, they wanted to break it up, is that something that you could help a landowner with?
Yeah, I'm working on one right now. It's not a huge property, but it's within the ETJ district of Austin, and so within the ETJ, you're dealing with the city of Austin. You want to get a release of the ETJ to go to the county, so that you have less restrictions on your property. With city code, there's a lot more restrictions versus county. And so when you're subdividing for those issues, it depends on what you're subdividing for. If you're just subdividing for the purposes of subdividing, there might be an exception. So if it's, I think, over 10 acres, there's an exception for that so that you don't have to go through the whole platting process. You can just do basically just a subdivision. So there's a lot of things that an attorney could help with that, as far as getting or letting you know that there's an exemption or exception to doing the full. And it'll also save you money, which is not something that attorneys always do, but if we can, we can. So
yeah, and there's a state law now that allows you to get out of an ETJ, correct?
There is, and then there's also land status determinations that you'll have to deal with after you get out of the ETJ. So the counties require the land status determinations as well as the city. So whatever you're dealing with, you're going to have to deal with a land status determination within the Austin area, at least.
Well, Stephen, we've covered a lot of ground. Let's have some closing thoughts from you, and anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to make sure our audience hears around businesses, real estate, family businesses.
Well, just the buying and selling of business, the actual business, not just the real estate. I think there's quite a few issues that you'll need to deal with, and the purchase agreement is different than just the real estate purchase agreement. So if you get like a realtor to do a business sale, that's not always the best thing, because they're not covering a lot of issues, and a lot of the issues with buying and selling of businesses is making sure you know what you're buying. And then you can also get better terms you can get seller financing, you can get SBA financing, so it can be easier to take on that business. And then you also want to exclude a lot of the collateral that we talked about previously when you buy the new business. So you might want to do a different entity or do a different refinance with your bank, and I can assist on that. So there's a totally separate purchase agreement that you do, and it's much more involved. There's a lot more warranties and covenants within a purchase agreement for buying a business or selling a business. There's a lot more due diligence that goes along with it. There's potentially employees that you're going to have to deal with and all the benefits that go along with that. And so the bigger the business, the more issues that you're going to have to deal with within that purchase agreement.
And you've worked on both sides, helping people sell businesses as well as purchase businesses, correct?
Yep. And I've got 2 in the hopper right now. I've done that whole range.
Yeah, that whole range of businesses.
Yeah, and same with real estate holding companies. You know, I've represented a holding company that $100 million worth of real estate. So there's a lot of different variances as you go up.
Sure.
But they're all kind of the same as far as the process goes.
But it sounds like it's definitely an area where you'd want an attorney to help you navigate either side of that equation.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, Stephen, thank you for joining us. Looking forward to our next podcast, and wish you continued success here with Braun Gresham, and
Thank you.
all of the business and finance expertise that you bring.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Your Texas Land. We hope you enjoyed hearing more from Stephen and his expertise on finance, businesses, and real estate. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. Really appreciate it. Until next time, keep being an advocate for Texas land, and thanks for listening.
The information in this podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and may not reflect the current law in your jurisdiction. No information contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice from Braun and Gresham PLLC.